The fog hung heavy over Fort Landon, coiling between the barracks like it had unfinished business. It rolled in from the Oregon coast, carrying the scent of salt, oil, and something older, gunmetal, and ghosts. At this hour, before Reveille, the base was a skeleton of itself. Just the hum of generators and the distant clink of a tool dropped too early. Sergeant Mason Hale walked alone along the edge of the supply range, his boots silent on the wet gravel. He didn't talk much anymore, not since the fall from the tower drill 6 months ago. Not since they zipped up the body bag on his canine partner, Gunner. The medic said he was lucky to walk again. But every step still felt like punishment. He wasn't supposed to be out here. Physical therapy cleared him only for light duty. But sleep had become a stranger, and Mason preferred fog to fluorescent lights. That's when he heard it. A sound, not mechanical, not human, not a cry, exactly. More like a question. Faint, muffled, alive. He stopped, head tilting, listening harder. It came again from somewhere near the old weapons crate stacked behind the decommissioned radio tower. He moved toward it without thinking, instincts kicking in where emotions no longer did. The crate was weather-warped and cracked down one side, a leftover from a logistics drill that ended weeks ago. He knelt, pressed a hand against the damp wood. Another sound, scratch, scratch, then a half whine, half chirp. Mason whispered to the crate. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." Then louder, to no one. "I need bolt cutters, or a crowbar." Except the fog gave no answer. So he pried with bare hands, teeth clenched against the pain in his ribs. The latch gave suddenly, and the top creaked open. Out shot a flash of soaked fur, eyes wild, yipping furiously. A German Shepherd pup, not more than 6 or 7 weeks old, tumbled out of the crate like a question mark chasing its own tail, mud-caked, shivering, but very much alive. The dog didn't bark. It scolded. A string of sharp yips, then a low growl, then a bizarre little chirping sound that made Mason recoil. It was language, not words, but rhythm, intent, emotion wrapped in noise. The pup locked eyes with him, deep amber, too bright for morning. Mason blinked. "You trying to say something?" The pup answered with a noise that fell between a huff and a hum, then darted forward and buried itself against Mason's thigh. The warmth soaked into him like adrenaline, electric and sudden. Okay. Hey, I got you." He unzipped his field jacket and wrapped the animal up, pulling it close. The dog made another sound, a strange, gurgled trill, then sighed. It sounded like a wordless sentence, a broken radio transmission only Mason could hear. "What the hell are you?" Footsteps behind. Private Elena Cruz, barely 20, her freckles still visible under morning dew, jogged up with a ration bar in hand. "Sergeant, we were looking for you. PT starts in—" She froze when she saw the bundled creature in his arms. "Oh my God, is that a puppy?" Mason stood slowly, still holding the pup. "Found him in a crate, left behind." She took a cautious step closer. The pup growled, not aggressive, more offended, then barked once, short, snappy. Cruz blinked. Did he just insult me? Mason didn't smile, but something in his eyes flickered. I think he's got opinions. They walked back to the main path together, fog thinning as the base came to life. Trucks rumbled to duty, and somewhere a whistle pierced the air. By the time they reached the medical tent, the dog had stopped shivering. It started muttering instead, grumbles and chirps and soft rumbles that rose and fell like breath on a wire. Dr. Alexis Tran stepped out before they even called her. Late 30s, all sharp lines and warm eyes, the kind of woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. Her lab coat flapped behind her fatigues, and her gloves were already on. "You're bleeding," she told Mason, nodding at his wrist. "It's not mine," he said, and handed her the pup. The dog resisted. It barked, loud, indignant, and turned back toward Mason, wiggling free enough to glance at him like betrayal. "He does that a lot," Mason muttered. "The noises." Dr. Tran raised a brow as the pup launched into a series of high-pitched vocalizations, yips, whines, then what could only be described as a complaint. "He's talking," she said flatly. "That's what I said." She brought him into the clinic, scanning the pup with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Except she hadn't. Not like this. No injuries, no malnutrition. But his vocal cords are overactive, like he's trying to mimic rhythm, emotional mimicry. I've seen this once. Maybe. With trauma-exposed animals. Mason didn't move. The pup was licking his own paws now, muttering to himself like a grumpy old man. "He needs rest," Dr. Tran added. "I'll watch him," Mason said. "Officially?" He hesitated. "He's already chosen me." She paused, then nodded, handed him a towel and a can of wet food. "What's his name?" Mason looked down at the bundle in his arms, at the soaking fur and those absurdly expressive eyes. "Echo." Dr. Tran frowned. "Because he mimics sound?" Mason shook his head. "Because everything he says bounces back." That night, in a dim barracks room that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and gun oil, Echo lay curled in a folded blanket at Mason's feet. The pup didn't sleep. He talked, quiet, rhythmic sounds, murmurs in the dark, and Mason, for the first time in months, listened. The war inside him hadn't stopped, but something was different. There was sound in the silence now. Not memory, not ghosts, a voice, a new one, small, defiant, alive, and it refused to shut up. The next morning, the fog was gone, replaced by a sharp coastal wind that cut across Fort Landon like a blade. Sunlight bounced off the gravel, off the steel barracks, off the rows of parked Humvees and supply crates, and somewhere in that orderly chaos came the unmistakable sound of a dog. Arguing. Echo barked once, high, short, deliberate, then followed with a whine that dropped in pitch like a sarcastic sigh. Private Benny Morales, arms full of gear, stopped mid-stride. "Yo, did he just roll his eyes at me?" Sergeant Mason Hale didn't even glance up from where he was crouched, retying a bootlace near Echo's kennel. "Probably. He's got opinions about everything." Echo gave a grumble in response, low and guttural, then chirped once as if to say, "Obviously." It had been less than 24 hours since the pup was found, but the base already knew his name, and more importantly, his voice. He didn't bark like a normal dog. He commented. If someone dropped a tray in the mess hall, Echo barked once and added a sound that resembled a huff. If a squad marched by off-tempo, he yipped twice, then whined dramatically. Someone even swore he mimicked the cadence whistle with surprising accuracy. Echo had no interest in commands. He wanted conversation. Dr. Alexis Tran stood in the shade outside the medical shed, arms crossed over her clipboard, eyes narrowed behind dark glasses. She had spent years studying animal cognition, but nothing quite prepared her for a dog that talked back. "He's not vocalizing for attention," she said, watching Echo react to a truck backfiring in the motor pool. The pup spun, let out a long hum, then a short burst of barks that almost mirrored the timing of the engine stutter. "He's sinking." "With the truck?" Mason asked. "No," she said, with emotion. "He responds not just to sound, but to the mood behind it." Mason said nothing. He just watched the dog roll in the dirt like a gremlin, shake off, then trot over and flop down beside him. "You've been quiet since yesterday," Alexis added. "Hard to get a word in." Echo huffed in agreement, resting his chin on Mason's boot. Later that afternoon, during drills, The base erupted in confusion when Echo refused to stay in his pen. Private Cruz caught him slinking past the mess tent, tail up, ears alert, making soft clicking sounds as if narrating his own mission. "You lost your dog again?" she called out, grinning. "He's not lost. He's conducting an unauthorized patrol," Mason muttered, trailing behind. Echo paused at the edge of the training field, crouched low, and let out a slow whine that turned upward, like a question mark in motion. A moment later, the rifle range erupted. Loud cracks, controlled bursts. Echo didn't flinch. Instead, he sang. It was the only word Mason could think of. A long, warbling tone that started in his chest and rose up into a strange, melodic howl. Too soft to be threatening, too rhythmic to be random. Echo held the note for several seconds, then cut off abruptly, as if satisfied. Everyone froze. Even the squad on the line lowered their rifles for a breath. Cruz whispered, "That was music?" Benny Morales muttered, "That was attitude." Mason knelt beside Echo. The dog looked up, panting, then let out a satisfied grunt like a drummer hitting the last note. "You're insane," Mason said quietly. "But you've got timing." Back at the medical shed, Alexis pulled Mason aside. "He's not just mimicking. He's translating." "Translating what?" "Us, the environment, stress, calm, tone. He processes more than sound. He mirrors." Mason stared at her. "You're saying he's, what, an empath?" Alexis hesitated, then nodded. "In a way, yes. Empathic mimicry. It's rare. But I've only seen it once before, after the wildfires in California. A rescue dog began echoing the sobs of children in evacuation shelters. It wasn't noise, it was connection." Mason ran a hand down his face. "So this dog might be picking up on what we don't say?" "That," Alexis said, "or he's just smarter than half the base." Echo barked once, then made a trilling sound like a laugh. That night, Mason sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the loose siding on the barracks. Echo lay near the foot of the bed, curled into his blanket, but not asleep. He rumbled softly, a low sound like a motor idling. Mason couldn't help it. "You don't shut up, do you?" Echo responded with 2 short chirps, then a long exhale. Mason chuckled, surprised at the sound of it. He reached down, ran a hand behind the dog's ears. For a moment he saw another set of ears, shorter, battle-scarred, black and tan. Gunner, his old canine partner, gone in seconds from a roadside IED. The silence that followed that explosion had lasted months. A silence Mason never outran. Until now. Echo stirred, then pressed his nose into Mason's hand and let out a sound so low and deliberate it stopped his breath. It wasn't a whimper. It wasn't a bark. It was comfort. That night, Mason slept without dreaming. And somewhere in the dark, Echo kept humming. Not loud, not for attention, just enough to remind the silence it wasn't alone anymore. By the 3rd day, Echo had stopped being a novelty. He'd become a phenomenon. He didn't follow orders the way other dogs did. He responded to them. With sounds, with inflection, with attitude. When Sergeant Mason Hales said, "Sit," Echo would let out a low grunt, drop his rear slowly to the ground like an old man with a sore back, then finish with a single bark that somehow carried the weight of a sarcastic, "Happy now." Private Benny Morales, mechanic, jokester, and amateur podcaster, was the first to really catch on. Benny had grown up in El Paso, the youngest of 5 brothers, and was the kind of guy who recorded conversations just to play back the funny parts later. The first time he heard Echo grunt at a missed throw of the training ball, he nearly dropped his wrench. "That dog's got opinions, man, like full-blown commentary." Mason didn't respond. He was still getting used to waking up to a creature that greeted the sunrise with a song and side-eye. But Benny wasn't letting it go. He started hanging around the shed during off hours, pretending to check the HVAC filters or oil levels while secretly recording clips of Echo's conversations. One afternoon, Mason caught him red-handed. "You following me?" "Nope, following the talent." He held up his phone and pressed play. The audio was grainy but unmistakable. Mason giving the command, "Stay." Then Echo's sequence of sounds, short bark, low growl, almost a yawn, then a chirp that sounded suspiciously like a "why?" "That wasn't coincidence," Benny said. "He's processing, responding. This is next-level communication." "You think he's fluent in sarcasm?" Benny grinned. "Fluent in attitude for sure." The next clip was the real gold. It started with Mason ordering, "Down." Echo dropped immediately, but then let out a 3-part grumble that escalated into a sharp bark, followed by a hum. It wasn't just noise, it sounded like he was arguing. "Echo argues with his handler?" Benny captioned the file. He uploaded it to his private channel that evening, expecting maybe a few hundred views. By morning, it had over 70,000. By noon, it broke 1 million. Someone remixed the audio into a fake debate clip, Mason on one side, Echo on the other, each talking over the other with subtitles like, "I said down, make me." It was stupid, it was brilliant, and it went viral. The video bounced from Reddit to Twitter to TikTok. Military meme pages picked it up. News anchors laughed through morning segments about the talking marine dog. Hashtags exploded. Echo Says No trended for a full 24 hours. Inside Fort Landon, Mason was mortified. "I don't want my dog turned into a circus," he grumbled. "He's not your dog." Benny shot back, still refreshing his phone. "He's America's dog now." Echo barked once, sharp and smug, as if agreeing. Dr. Alexis Tran showed up not long after, holding a tablet with 3 open emails from journalists requesting interviews. Apparently, NPR wants to feature Echo in their Hidden Brains segment, she said dryly. Mason ran a hand over his face. "God help us." Alexis, however, wasn't laughing. She had been quietly documenting Echo's behavior for days. Video clips, voice frequency maps, neural response charts. What she was seeing didn't fit the traditional canine behavioral spectrum. "His vocal patterns mimic stress inflection," she told Mason. "When you're calm, his sounds are shorter, lower. When you're frustrated, he goes high-pitch and exaggerated, like he's copying your tension." "He's making fun of me. He's mirroring you." They watched a playback together. Mason shouting, "Heel!" during a drill. Echo responding with an extended grunt, then falling in line, not fast, but in sync with Mason's breathing pattern. "This is emotional translation," Alexis whispered. "And people think he's just being cute," Mason added. That afternoon, the base commander summoned Mason to his office. Captain Royce Walker was a man who rarely blinked, let alone smiled. His walls were lined with commendations, none for tolerance. "I've got 3 media requests, 1 congressional inquiry, and a 5-star general's grandson asking if he can adopt the dog." Mason stood at attention. "Sir, permission to clarify. He's not for adoption." Walker sighed. "I know. I read the incident reports. I watched the damn clip. What I want to know, Sergeant, is whether this dog is a liability." "No, sir." "Then prove it. Control the situation, or they'll take him out of your hands and send him to a research facility." Mason felt a knot tighten in his chest. Later that evening, he returned to the shed. Echo sat near the door, wagging his tail in slow, even beats. Mason knelt beside him. "You caused a mess, kid." Echo let out a purring hum, followed by a single soft bark that felt like an apology. "Yeah," Mason muttered. "Not your fault." He sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed. "Gunner was quiet," he said. Never barked unless he had to. Saved my life once without a sound. Echo tilted his head. I kept waiting for the noise to come back after he died, but it didn't. The pup moved closer, rested his chin on Mason's thigh. Then you showed up, loud, rude, no filter. Echo rumbled, a low, steady vibration that settled in Mason's bones like heat. Mason opened his eyes. You keep doing whatever it is you're doing, but from now on, we do it together. Echo lifted his head, gave a soft chirp, and nestled in closer. Outside, the base fell quiet for the night, but inside the little supply shed, the hum of a dog's voice filled the space between grief and healing. And for the first time in a long time, Mason didn't feel like he had to say anything at all. Echo had already said it for him. The morning after the video broke 3 million views, Echo had his own fan mail. Literal envelopes, addressed to Echo the Talking Dog, care of Fort Landon. They came in thick stacks, crayon-colored, coffee-stained, scented with perfume, or just plain hope. Some letters were from kids who'd lost a pet. Others from veterans who hadn't spoken in years until Echo's yelps made them laugh. One note, scrawled in shaky handwriting, simply said, "He sounds like how my dad used to breathe when he was home." Private Benny Morales dumped the pile on Mason's desk, grinning wide. "You want me to start a P.O. box?" Mason stared at the heap, at the marker drawings of Echo in sunglasses, Echo saluting, Echo howling at the moon like a furry Sinatra. He didn't smile. Benny's grin faded. "Hey, you okay?" Mason said nothing, just slid one envelope aside and picked up the next. Inside was a photo of a toddler sitting on the floor beside a laptop screen. Echo's voice was frozen mid-bark. The kid was reaching out, one hand pressed to the screen. The caption read, "First smile in weeks." That afternoon, the air on base felt different. Lighter but tighter, as if everyone was watching for the next Echo moment. They got it. During a lunchtime drill, Echo responded to a poorly timed cadence by barking in perfect rhythm, then letting out a sound so close to a scoffing laugh that even the drill sergeant choked. Within minutes, the clip was online. Within hours, TikTokers were stitching it with reactions. "He's not just a dog, he's a shade-throwing sergeant." Echo said, "Not on my watch." Hashtags flooded in. Echo the sergeant, bark back, talk to Echo. It wasn't just social media. Podcasts were analyzing his emotional syntax. Late-night talk shows aired sound bites between monologues. Animal behaviorists debated whether Echo was the next generation of therapy dog or a fluke of nature. Then came the Pentagon memo. Mason was summoned to Captain Royce Walker's office just before sundown. The sky outside was blood orange, but inside the air was still, clinical. Walker sat behind a desk so tidy it looked staged. He didn't invite Mason to sit. "You know why you're here." "Echo's video." Mason replied flatly. Walker nodded once, tapped a sealed folder. "That dog's bigger than this base now. Headquarters wants him transferred to the Canine Behavioral Research Center in Texas. They want to study him properly." Mason's jaw clenched. "He's not a lab rat." They disagree. Walker opened the folder, pulled out a typed form with the red stamp. Transfer order. Immediate evaluation. Priority level red. "He leaves in 3 days. Escort provided. You'll be relieved of handler duties once he arrives." Mason didn't speak. Couldn't. Walker leaned forward. "I get it. You bonded. But we don't run this place on sentiment. Echo's not just yours anymore." "He never was mine," Mason said quietly. "But he sure as hell doesn't belong in a cage." Walker stared. "You forget your place, Sergeant." "No, sir. I remember exactly where I lost it." Silence fell between them. When Mason walked out, the sky had turned navy. The last orange bled out behind the motor pool, and in the distance, Echo's familiar voice rumbled from the kennel. Not a bark, not a whine, a question. Back at the shed, Mason found Echo pacing, restless, tail twitching. He dropped to one knee, and the pup ran straight into his chest. Mason buried his face in Echo's fur and let out a breath that tasted like guilt and salt. "They're moving you," he murmured. "Again." Echo let out a low growl, then a high-pitched yip that almost resembled protest. "I know." Moments later, Dr. Alexis Tran burst through the door, lab coat flapping behind her like a flag at half-mast. "They can't do this." Mason stood. They already did. She dropped a printed report on the workbench, flipping open the last page. Echo's cortisol levels spike in confined spaces. His heart rate increases when isolated. He doesn't regulate stress through silence. He regulates it through interaction. If they move him, his gift dies. He's not a machine. No, he's a bridge. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. I've spent years around animals who shut down after trauma. Echo does the opposite. He doesn't just recover, he repairs. People, places, the air around him. You cage that, it's gone. Mason rubbed his temples. "Tell that to command." "I will," she snapped. "But I need data, recordings, logs, witnesses. I'll write the report tonight." Mason exhaled. "They'll ignore it. Maybe, but we won't." Outside, the base lights flickered on one by one. Somewhere, a radio buzzed static. A plane droned past in the clouds. Inside the shed, Echo sat quietly now, head resting on his paws, ears alert. Watching. Waiting. Mason sat beside him, back against the wall, the future curling like fog at the edge of his thoughts. "I'm not losing you," he said softly. Echo didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hum, low and constant, filled the silence like a promise. And in that moment, Mason understood something he hadn't felt since Gunner's last breath. He was going to fight. Not just for a dog. For the only voice that had ever dared to answer back. The announcement came with a cold stamp and an even colder silence. Echo was to be transferred to a civilian rehabilitation center in Nevada within 72 hours. No appeal, no exceptions. The order hit the base like a gut punch. It wasn't just the Marines who felt it. It was the janitor who always left his mop to talk to Echo at lunch. The mechanic who slipped extra blankets into his kennel during the night shift. The rookie lance corporal who had never known war but had seen enough loss to recognize loyalty when it stared back through a kennel gate. That night, someone tacked up a sketch outside Echo's run. Charcoal lines, rough but proud. Private Echo, always on duty. No one signed it. By morning, a line had formed at the kennel. Private Chen from Supply quietly placed his grandfather's brass compass beside Echo's water bowl. "So you always find your way back," he whispered. The mess hall's head chef, Santiago, brought over a tray of slow-roasted beef. "His favorite," he said, not meeting Mason's eyes. I checked the logs. Even the base commander, usually stiff by the book, stood in silence, then knelt to leave his own silver badge on Echo's collar. "You've served more than some humans," he muttered, before walking away without another word. Mason hadn't spoken since the order came. He didn't eat, didn't shower, just sat outside Echo's kennel, elbows on his knees, pen in hand, journal open. That night, under the sharp hum of the overhead light, Mason finally wrote, "They think Echo's barking is noise, but it's not. He doesn't bark for food. He barks for people. He barks for the kid who came home broken, for the sergeant who never made it home, for the ones who don't have words left." He paused, pen trembling, then added, "We name our dogs with ranks they never asked for, but they earn them anyway." By the second night, half the barracks stayed awake. Some gathered around the kennel, sharing beers, sharing silence. Others brought mementos, patches, boots, dog tags. A few just came to sit. "You know," whispered Thompson, the medic who patched up Echo the first time, "when they say no man left behind, I always thought that meant no one. Not just humans." The tension thickened. No one said the word mutiny, but everyone felt the same sting of injustice. Echo didn't belong in a cage in Nevada. He belonged here, with them. But Mason knew what others didn't. The transfer wasn't just red tape, it was strategic. Echo's barking had drawn attention during recent drills. Loud, precise, timed with incoming signals. A visiting Pentagon analyst had noticed, and flagged it. They weren't relocating Echo for rest. They were neutralizing an asset. Mason's hands balled into fists. He wanted to fight, to tear the papers, to scream. But he didn't. Instead, he walked into the command office the next morning and quietly said, "I'll escort him myself, all the way." "Voluntarily?" the CO asked. "No," Mason replied, "because it's the right thing to do." That night, the barracks was quiet. Too quiet. Echo, sensing something was off, whimpered. Mason opened the kennel, knelt, and looked the dog in the eye. "Don't bark tonight," he whispered. "I need to think." Echo rested his head on Mason's knee, eyes searching his face for answers Mason didn't have. By dawn, Mason had made his decision. He picked up his pen one last time. Maybe sacrifice isn't about giving up what you love. Maybe it's about protecting it, even if that means letting go. He tore the page out, folded it twice, and slid it into Echo's collar. No words, just silence, just loyalty. And one final bark as Echo turned towards the gate. The mail arrived late that morning, a single envelope tucked between a pile of standard military requisitions and a catalogue for surplus parts. Mason almost missed it, plain white, slightly crumpled, the address handwritten in uneven, looping script. To Echo, the talking dog, Fort Landon. The return address was from Alaska. No last name, just Liam, Age 9. Mason opened it on instinct, expecting another fan drawing or a note about how Echo is so funny. But as he unfolded the letter, something shifted. The handwriting wobbled, and some words were scratched, out, like the writer had hesitated. Then he read it. "Hi, Echo. My name is Liam. I'm 9. My dad used to be a soldier. He died last year. When he came home from work, he didn't talk, but he used to hum to our dog. When I saw your video, you made the same sound. My mum cried when she heard it. She said it sounded like my dad before he got sick. Thank you for talking. It helped. Love, Liam from Anchorage." Mason sat still for a long time. Echo, sensing the weight in the room, padded over and rested his chin on Mason's boot, humming low, like he knew what was in that folded paper. Dr. Alexis Tran arrived 5 minutes later, mid-stride, as usual. "I just ran final cortisol data and noise response modeling." Mason held up the letter. She stopped. Her eyes scanned it once, then again. By the time she finished, her voice was quieter. "Do you know what this is?" A 9-year-old pouring grief into a piece of paper. "It's more than that," Alexis said. "It's evidence, emotional resonance, proof that Echo's vocalizations aren't just mimicry. They're memory triggers, neuroacoustic recall." Mason gave her a look. She clarified. "He doesn't just sound like a dog. He sounds like someone we lost, and that's doing something to people." She was right. That night, a photo of the letter leaked online. Nobody knew how. It didn't matter. By morning, the story exploded. "Boy says talking dog sounds like his fallen father. Echo's voice brings grief and comfort to millions." Podcasters debated the psychological implications. Grief counselors praised Echo's natural ability to connect. Parents posted videos of their kids watching Echo's clips on repeat, laughing through tears. Veterans left comments in all caps. "He sounds like my buddy Mike used to after patrol. I haven't cried in 5 years. I cried tonight. Thank you, Echo." It spread like wildfire. Not hype, not virality. Something quieter, deeper, recognition. At Fort Landon, things changed fast. News crews requested access. Therapists called the base commander asking if Echo could be studied for PTSD support programs. A famous journalist dubbed him America's unofficial grief counselor. But the transfer order to Nevada still stood. Echo had 24 hours. That evening, Alexis stood in front of the barracks with a small, hastily assembled panel, 3 officers, 1 Pentagon liaison, and a behavioral scientist flown in from San Diego. She cleared her throat, flipped open her folder. "Echo is not a combat support candidate," she said. "I submit that his vocal behavior is a form of empathic vocalization, an emerging field. He shows no instinct for aggression, no desire for isolation, and no measurable response to weapon-based stimuli." The behavioral scientist raised a brow. "So what is he, doctor?" "A bridge," she said, "between the ones who came home and the ones who didn't." The room fell silent. Mason stepped forward, holding the letter. He didn't heal with commands, he healed with connection. He passed it across the table. The Pentagon rep read it, then looked up slowly. "You're saying this dog has national therapeutic value?" Alexis didn't blink. "I'm saying he already proved it." By nightfall, the conversation had reached someone higher up. No one said which general. No one knew who made the final call. But at 10:17 p.m., the red transfer stamp on Echo's file was officially marked on hold. The base breathed again. Mason sat outside the kennel, Echo curled beside him, tail thumping once, then again. The stars above were clean and bright, and somewhere in Alaska, a boy named Liam was probably already asleep. Mason opened his journal. "Some dogs serve by sniffing bombs, some serve by standing guard. Echo sings to the silence, and somehow that's enough." Echo rumbled softly in his sleep. A low, steady sound. Not barking, not protesting, just breathing. With them. For them. And across the country, people started listening closer to what they used to ignore. A bark, a hum, a sound like memory wrapped in fur. It wasn't noise. It was a voice. The rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered over Camp Redding like ghosts reluctant to move on. Mason stood outside the admin building, still soaked from the earlier storm. His boots heavy with mud. His breath shallow with disbelief. Echo sat beside him, ears twitching, eyes trained on the door. Neither of them spoke. Not that Echo needed words. He hadn't made a sound since the incident. Then the door creaked open. Colonel Bradford stepped out, his expression unreadable. His presence had always carried weight, but now there was something else behind his eyes. Regret. "Mason," the colonel said, voice low but steady. "The reassignment's been suspended. Indefinitely." Mason blinked. "Sir, you're staying on as Echo's handler. Full authorization. We're calling it a guardian assignment, until we find him a place that understands him." Mason didn't reply. He couldn't. "Also, HQ just made it official." Bradford added, "Echo is no longer listed as an asset. He's now considered a veteran." The word hit harder than Mason expected. Not canine, not property, veteran. Echo shifted, eyes meeting Mason's. There was something in that gaze, stillness, gravity, as if the dog knew what was happening and approved. By nightfall, word had spread across the base, not just about the halted reassignment, but what Echo had done. How he'd walked back into that shattered building, found the missing boy, refused to leave without him. How he had spoken through his wounds, his silence, and the one howl that changed everything. They posted the photo on the wall in the rec room. Echo sitting upright beside the boy, nose pressed gently to the kid's broken arm. No caption, none needed. Within days, Echo became more than a dog. He became a story, a lesson, symbol. One corporal launched a website, talktoecho.org. At first it was just a tribute. Then came the messages. My brother came home from his third tour and stopped speaking, but when I showed him Echo's video, he nodded. First time in 6 months. My daughter cried when she saw Echo. She said, "He's sad but strong, like me." Now she sleeps with a toy shepherd at her side. Is Echo real? Mason read every post, sometimes at night, sometimes in silence, sometimes with shaking hands. He was no longer sure who was saving who. The command center approved public awareness funding. Echo now had a mission patch, a silver paw print overlaid with a heartbeat line. Soldiers started wearing it voluntarily on their gear, and still Echo said nothing. But every morning he sat beside the rec room door, tail motionless, head high, watching, guarding. Then one evening something shifted. Mason was sitting on the edge of his cot, staring at Shadow's old collar still hanging on the wall. He hadn't touched it in nearly a year. Couldn't. But Echo approached, slowly, and placed his head in Mason's lap. A low rumble escaped his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Just presence. Mason's shoulders dropped. His hand trembled as he reached out, not for Echo, but for the collar. He took it down gently, cradled it like glass. The metal tag clinked softly against his palm. And then, just like that, something inside him cracked open. Tears came, raw and soundless. Not from pain, not even from guilt, but from the strange grace of it all, the way a dog who didn't speak had helped him hear again. He buried his face in Echo's neck. The fur smelled like dust and salt and earth. "Thank you," Mason whispered, voice breaking. "God, thank you." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but inside it was quiet, whole. Later that week, Echo received his official designation. Companion Guardian, Unit Echo 9. No cage, no muzzle, no expiration. Just a note in the margin of his file. Handler optional, loyalty permanent. And in the journal Mason kept hidden under his bunk, a new entry appeared. Shadow barked for danger. Echo barks for truth. But tonight, he didn't bark at all. He didn't have to. He was heard. 1 year later. Montana. The air was quieter there. Not silent, but soft in the way morning light tiptoes across an old wooden floor. That floor belonged to a weathered house on the edge of Sage Hollow, where a 72-year-old widow named Marlene Quinn lived alone. At least until Echo came. The house stopped creaking when Echo arrived. She wrote in a letter to her late husband. He brought back music. Echo, still limping but stronger, had become something more than a dog to her. He was rhythm. He was pulse. He was presence. Each morning, he'd push open the old screen door with his nose, then sit on the porch like a watchman of the wind. The townsfolk called him the story dog. At 4 p.m., sharp every Saturday, Echo would ride in the front seat of Marlene's pickup to the Briarwood Children's Shelter. He'd sit in the middle of the reading circle. The kids would gather, not because of the books, but because Echo would talk. Not words, not tricks, but a series of low, rumbling vocalizations, gentle howls, soft whimpers, playful purrs, that somehow matched the rise and fall of each story. When the prince was lost in the woods, Echo whimpered. When the dragon threatened the town, he let out a short bark. When the orphan girl found her way home, Echo wagged his tail and pressed his nose into the reader's palm. It was never taught. No one trained him. He just knew. One day, a new boy joined the group. Miles, 8 years old, Hadn't spoken a word since being found in a motel bathroom 2 months earlier. The staff said he was mute. But Echo didn't agree. Miles refused to sit with the others at first. He hovered by the bookshelf in the corner, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Until Echo got up, limped over, and sat beside him. Not in front, beside, quiet, present. 3 visits later, during a reading of The Velveteen Rabbit, Echo let out a soft moan at the moment the boy in the story whispers, "You were real to me." And that's when it happened. Miles whispered back, "You too." The room froze. The staff blinked. One girl cried. Echo didn't react like a dog. He leaned in, like he understood. That clip went viral within 72 hours. The video of a talking dog healing silent children made it to every corner of the internet. Offers flooded in, sponsors, talk shows, universities. Marlene turned them all down. "We're not a show," she said. "We're a song. You don't commercialize the wind." Back at Fort Landon, the once-forgotten military base where Echo had been left bleeding in a cage, something unexpected happened. A memorial went up. It wasn't grand, just a simple bronze plaque near the front gate. It read, "In honor of Canine Echo. He didn't bark for war. He barked for home." People began leaving things by the plaque. Kids sent hand-drawn pictures of dogs with capes. Soldiers left medals they no longer needed. One veteran left a folded flag and a note that simply read, "He stayed when I couldn't." One afternoon, as snow started falling over Montana, Marlene sat by the window, watching Echo lay beneath the piano, his favorite spot. "Why the piano?" someone had once asked her. She smiled. "He doesn't need the keys. He is the music." But that day, Echo didn't rise when she called. Not at first. She walked over gently, hand trembling. Then, a soft thump of his tail. He wasn't asleep. He was listening. Marlene exhaled, sat beside him and whispered, "Still guarding, huh, boy?" Echo nudged her hand, as if to say always. That night, the sky over Sage Hollow was particularly clear, and for the first time in a long time, no wind howled. Not a leaf moved, not a window creaked. But in the stillness, just barely audible, was the low hum of something ancient and kind. Echo, still telling stories. The world didn't need more barking. It needed something else entirely. 3 months after the rescue, Mason sat in a quiet green room, backstage at a Denver television studio. Echo rested by his feet, calm, ears twitching slightly, as if attuned to the low buzz of electricity in the air. Her eyes scanned the room, not in anxiety, but presence. Awareness. Dr. Alexis stood by the monitor, prepping for the live segment. A former combat trauma therapist turned media advocate, she had been instrumental in shaping what the world would now know as Echo's Voice, a national initiative for veterans with PTSD and for the dogs who had saved them. Outside, the streets were filled with protesters and reporters alike, but this time the signs didn't read, "Stop the war." They read, "Silent wounds deserve to be heard." And in smaller letters below, "Echo's voice lives here." Backstage, Mason adjusted his collar. "You think this is really going to matter?" he asked without looking up. Alexis turned, eyebrow raised. "Mason, a dog barked at nothing and uncovered a trafficking ring. She dragged herself to you across a field of glass. You think that doesn't matter?" Echo blinked slowly, then placed her paw on Mason's boot. "She knows the answer," Alexis added, half smiling. "Let's go." The cameras rolled. Lights flared. Dr. Alexis opened the broadcast with steady calm. "Some dogs follow commands, some teach us new languages." Footage cut in. Echo pacing the hospital hallway, the red-stained snowfield, the barn where they found her curled around the injured boy. Then Mason's face filled the screen. Rough, honest, scarred in a way that didn't need explanation. I used to think silence was safer, he said quietly. Then this dog walked into my silence and barked. The studio was silent. Even the production crew behind the glass didn't move. For a brief moment, it felt as if everyone was breathing with Echo. The camera panned down. Echo was sitting tall beside Mason's chair, chest out, head slightly tilted. Not looking at the crowd, not looking at the cameras, but listening, as always. Within weeks, Echo's voice went beyond the screen. Veterans hospitals began incorporating therapy dogs with specific PTSD training, not just to serve, but to listen. The curriculum extended to schools, shelters, and even prisons. A section of the National Military Library in D.C. dedicated a permanent space for service animals and mental wellness, with a bronze statue of a German shepherd lying alert beside a soldier's boots. The plaque read, "She didn't serve in silence. She served the silence." Echo herself became something more than a symbol. She visited children's hospitals, where non-verbal kids reached out just to touch her fur. She attended graduation ceremonies at military rehab, programs where veterans shared their own barking moments, times they chose to speak out, act, or simply stay alive. She even appeared in court once, in a high-profile abuse case, lying under the witness stand where a teenage boy found the courage to testify. And then there was the book. Mason never planned to write it. But late at night, long after Echo was asleep, he found himself typing. Not stories, memories, pages filled with things he had never said out loud. Eventually they formed a shape, a narrative that wasn't about war or trauma or even survival. It was about what happened after survival. The Dog That Spoke to My Silence hit the shelves 6 months later. It wasn't a bestseller overnight. It didn't need to be. It was passed hand to hand in veterans' halls, read aloud in therapy circles, annotated by therapists, tucked into care packages, a quiet ripple that outlasted the splash. One night, Mason received a letter, scrawled in simple penmanship. "My son hadn't spoken in 2 years. Then he pointed to your book and said, 'Like me. Thank you.'" He read it twice, then reached down and placed the letter on Echo's crate, where he now slept more often. "Still talking," he whispered. Echo stirred, thumped her tail once, and went back to dreaming. But the true legacy came unexpectedly. It was during a visit to a small rural school in Montana. Echo had just sat through 20 minutes of eager third graders petting her ears when a girl in the back raised her hand. "Does Echo understand English?" Asked. "No," Mason said. "He understands something deeper. He hears what you mean." The room went still. Another boy whispered, "Can he teach us to listen like that?" Mason paused. "I think he already is." Behind him, Echo barked once, sharp, focused, certain. And outside the classroom, where the snow had started falling again, the world grew just a little quieter. Not because it had nothing to say, but because it was finally learning to listen. Late afternoon light spilled across the porch like honey, soft and golden, wrapping everything in warmth that didn't quite chase the chill. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine, and somewhere in the distance a wind chime clinked once, then fell quiet. Mason Hale sat in his usual spot, a weathered wooden chair just left of the porch swing. His back ached more these days, his reflexes slower, but the stillness didn't bother him like it used to. At his feet, Echo lay stretched out, head resting on his paws, body heavier than it had been, fur now tinged with grey around the muzzle. His eyes remained sharp, though, alert as ever. One ear tilted toward Mason, the other turned to the wind. The old radio crackled to life behind them. "Tonight," said the host, her voice soft and deliberate. We remember a soldier, a dog, and the sound that made the silence bearable. Mason smiled faintly. He reached down, fingers brushing the thick fur behind Echo's ears. "You still listening to all this?" he asked. Echo's tail gave a slow thump. The hum came next. Low, gentle, like breath pressed into song. Mason exhaled. The sound had changed over the years, softer now, less urgent, but it still carried that unmistakable tone. Present. Alive. "Still talking, huh, buddy?" he murmured. Echo didn't move, just let out another soft rumble, as if saying, "You talk, I'll listen." Inside the house, the kettle began to hiss. On the walls hung framed photos, Mason in uniform beside Echo at Fort Landon. A child reading aloud while Echo lay beside him. The first event poster for the Echo's Voice tour. But here, on the porch, there were no accolades, no cameras, just a man and his dog watching the world slow down. A truck passed on the gravel road, kicking up dust. A hawk cut through the sky. Somewhere down in the valley the church bell rang once. Echo didn't stir. Still guarding. Still home. Mason leaned back and closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. The world wasn't quiet. Not really, it never had been. It had just taken him a long time to learn how to hear what mattered. And Echo had taught him that. That night, after the sun sank below the ridge and the last of the light faded from the fields, the screen door creaked open. A boy from town, 10, maybe 11, stepped onto the porch, clutching a copy of The Dog That Spoke to My Silence against his chest. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly, "is it true Echo used to talk?" Mason didn't answer right away. He looked down at Echo, who was already watching the boy, ears up. "Still does," Mason replied. "You just gotta listen the right way." The boy smiled, knelt down, and placed his palm on Echo's back. The dog leaned in, humming low. The boy's eyes widened. "I heard him," he whispered. "He said, 'Hi.'" Mason grinned. "Yeah, he says that a lot." Later, when the boy left, and the stars rose one by one across the Montana sky, Mason returned to the porch. He sat beside Echo, notebook on his lap, pen in hand. His last entry for the night was just 2 lines. He never barked for food. He barked for what matters. As the screen fades, the final image lingers, the silhouette of an old shepherd at rest, head high, ears listening, even in sleep. And a voice, faint, warm, echoes one last time. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Share it below. Subscribe to the channel. Help us keep Echo's voice alive. And remember, some barks aren't noise. They're a kind of music. You just have to hear it. The German Shepherd Channel. Because the right bark can change everything.